The wind howled across the green planet, carrying the sound of distant thunder that rolled through the misty valleys. Alina pulled her hood tighter around her face, her boots sinking into the wet soil as rain began to fall again. The air smelled of wet leaves and metal, the scent of the research outpost that had been her home for the last 6 months. She had spent the day collecting samples near the ravine when she heard a strange sound, faint but sharp, cutting through the rhythm of the rain. It wasn't the usual hum of the forest or the cry of one of the harmless gliders that lived among the trees. This was different, a short, desperate sound that almost resembled pain. She froze, listening carefully, her heart beating a little faster. There it was again, a small, strained whimper, followed by a low, warning growl. Curiosity and concern pulled her forward. She stepped carefully through the ferns, brushing aside thick vines until she reached the edge of the ravine. The ground was uneven, dark mud slick with rain, and one wrong step could send her sliding down the slope. She crouched, scanning the shadows below. That's when she saw it. A small creature half buried in a pile of broken branches and wet leaves. Its fur, once silver and smooth, was caked with mud and blood. Its glowing amber eyes stared up at her, wide with both terror and defiance. Her breath caught. She knew what it was, a young wreck. Even as cubs, they were feared by everyone on the planet. The locals claimed they were born hunters, their instincts sharp from birth. Stories said they could sense fear in a person's heartbeat. The outpost had strict rules about avoiding them. If you see one, her commander had warned, you walk away. They don't understand kindness. But looking at the creature now, struggling to free its trapped paw from a twisted branch, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. It was small, no larger than a house cat, but its body trembled with exhaustion and pain. Its breathing was ragged, its fur slick from the rain. She took a slow step closer, speaking softly even though she knew it wouldn't understand her words. "Hey there. It's okay. I won't hurt you." The cub's ears flattened, and it let out a weak hiss, showing small, sharp teeth. But its strength was fading. The rain poured harder now, splashing against her jacket and running down her arms. She crouched near the edge of the ravine, her boots sliding slightly in the mud. "Easy," she whispered, reaching for the creature. It snapped once, its jaw clamping down on the air inches from her hand. She didn't flinch, she just waited. Its breathing grew faster, then slower, until it stopped resisting. Carefully, she reached forward again, pushing away the branches that trapped it. When she finally lifted it free, it let out a soft, broken cry, more of a whimper than a growl. She could feel its small body trembling violently against her hands. Its fur was icy cold, and its pulse beat too fast beneath her fingers. Alina knew she was breaking the rules, but she also knew that if she left it there, it would die before morning. "You've got fight in you," she murmured, wrapping it gently in her field jacket. The cub's glowing eyes blinked once, unfocused, before its head dropped weakly against her arm. She adjusted her grip and began the climb back up, each step heavy and slow in the slippery mud. The rain soaked through her clothes and her arms ached from holding the small creature, but she didn't stop. The wind roared, tugging at her hood, and the thunder cracked above like a warning. By the time she reached the outpost, the lights from the camp cut through the fog, warm and steady. A guard at the gate looked at her in shock when he saw what she was carrying. "You brought a wreck?" he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "Are you out of your mind?" Alina ignored him, brushing past quickly. "It's hurt," she said simply. "I couldn't just leave it." The guard shook his head, muttering under his breath, but didn't try to stop her. Inside the medical unit, the smell of antiseptic and metal filled the air. She laid the cub gently on a padded table, still wrapped in her jacket. It stirred weakly, one paw twitching as it let out a soft sound somewhere between a growl and a cry. Alina's hands trembled slightly as she peeled off her gloves and checked its wounds. Nothing life-threatening, just deep scratches and a sprain. The creature's chest rose and fell rapidly, its eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. She brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, her heart still pounding. She could feel the faint vibration of its heartbeat under her palm, fast, scared, but alive. For a moment, she just stood there, watching it breathe. The others might call her foolish, but she didn't see a monster. She saw a scared, hurt creature that had fought to survive. And as lightning flashed outside the window, Alina made a quiet promise to herself. She would help it heal, no matter what it was or what anyone said. The cub's body relaxed slightly, its breathing evening out as it drifted into sleep. She smiled faintly, pulling the jacket a little tighter around it. "You're safe now," she whispered. The storm outside raged on, but inside that small medical room. For the first time that night, the world felt a little calmer. The small medical unit was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and the steady patter of rain against the windows. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood. Alina stood beside the examination table, watching the small creature wrapped in a thermal blanket. Its breathing was slow but uneven, its chest rising and falling with short, restless motions. The faint blue light from the monitors flickered across its matted fur, revealing faint scars and old injuries hidden beneath the dirt. She had cleaned most of the mud from its body and bandaged its injured leg, but it still looked fragile, too fragile to be something that the locals feared so much. She turned for a moment to adjust the light. That's when she heard it, a low growl, soft but filled with warning. She froze. The cub's eyes snapped open, glowing amber once again. Its pupils were thin slits, sharp and focused directly on her. In one quick motion, it lifted its head and snapped at her hand. Its teeth grazed her glove, the sound of the bite echoing in the still room. Alina didn't move. Her heart jumped, but she didn't pull back. She simply looked at it, her eyes calm. The others in the lab, two of her colleagues, gasped and stepped back instantly, knocking over a tray of instruments in their panic. "Are you crazy?" one whispered. "That thing's wild," but Alina didn't seem to hear them. Her gaze stayed fixed on the cub, her breathing even. The creature bared its tiny, razor-sharp teeth again, a low rumble vibrating in its chest, its ears flattened against its head, its body tensed to strike again. But there was something else behind that growl. Not hatred, not aggression, but fear. It wasn't attacking to hurt. It was warning her to stay away. She slowly crouched down beside the table so that her eyes were level with its own. Her voice was soft, calm, steady, the kind of tone someone used to soothe a frightened animal. "Hey," she whispered gently, her words quiet but confident. "You're okay now. No one's going to hurt you." Her colleagues stood frozen near the door, too afraid to step closer. "You need to sedate it," one of them hissed, but she shook her head slightly without taking her eyes off the cub. "No, it's scared, not violent." The cub growled again, a sound too deep for its small size. Its tail flicked, its claws digging slightly into the soft blanket beneath it. Alina didn't retreat. She slowly extended her gloved hand toward it again, this time stopping just before it could reach her. The cub's eyes tracked her movement, its breathing quick and shallow. For a few tense seconds, neither of them moved. Then the creature's growl softened, turning into a low, uncertain rumble. Alina could see the tremble in its muscles, the way its small body shook not from rage but exhaustion. "You're tired," she murmured quietly. "You've been fighting too long, haven't you?" Her tone carried no fear, only warmth. The cub's breathing began to slow. It blinked once, its ears twitching slightly. The light in its eyes flickered, the intensity fading into confusion. She stayed there for another minute, not moving, just letting it look at her, study her, and decide what she was. The tension in the room began to shift. The air no longer felt sharp and heavy, but calm, cautious, like the quiet before dawn. Behind her, someone whispered, "It could tear your hand off," but Alina ignored them. The cub's head lowered slightly, its growl fading to a faint hum. It didn't trust her yet, not fully, but it no longer looked ready to attack. It was watching, waiting. She finally spoke again, still calm. "You don't need to fight anymore. You're safe here." The words didn't matter. Not the language. It was the tone that reached it. The creature tilted its head, blinking as if it recognized something familiar in her voice, something gentle. When she stood up slowly, the cub didn't react. It simply followed her movement with its eyes. She turned off the bright overhead light, leaving only the soft glow from the side lamp. The room felt warmer instantly. Alina placed a bowl of water near the table's edge, careful not to make sudden movements. The cub didn't touch it yet, but it didn't hiss either. That, she thought, was progress. Her colleagues finally stepped forward, still wary. "You're lucky it didn't bite through the glove," one muttered. Alina only smiled faintly and looked down at the creature, which was now watching her more curiously than defensively. "It wasn't trying to hurt me," she said quietly. "It's afraid. That's all." As she turned off the equipment and dimmed the room's lights, the cub's eyes followed her every step. She paused at the doorway for a moment, her hand resting on the frame. The creature shifted slightly, letting out a faint, uncertain chirp, a sound that didn't sound like a growl at all. She looked back and smiled softly. "You'll learn," she whispered, half to herself. Not everything that reaches out means harm. When she left the room, the cub lay still under the blanket, its small head resting on its paws. For the first time since it had woken up, it didn't snarl. It simply watched the door close, the echo of her calm voice still lingering in the air, the first sound of kindness it had ever known. Morning light filtered through the thin glass windows of the medical unit, soft and golden after a long night of rain. The air inside was calm, filled with the faint hum of machines and the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Alina stood quietly at the doorway, holding a small bowl of food in her hands. The cub was awake now, lying on its blanket, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Its injuries were healing, but its spirit hadn't softened. When she stepped closer, its ears twitched and its gaze sharpened. It watched her like a shadow watches movement, intense, wary, and full of suspicion. She moved slowly, her steps deliberate and gentle. She didn't speak right away, letting the silence between them settle. It wasn't angry. It was waiting, testing, deciding whether she was danger or safety. She stopped a few feet from the table and crouched down so her eyes were level with its own. The cub's tail flicked once, and a low growl rumbled in its throat, though it stayed still. Alina smiled softly. "I know," she said quietly, as if talking to a frightened child. "You don't trust me yet." The cub didn't understand the words, but her calm tone seemed to keep it from lashing out. She set the bowl down on the table, small cuts of nutrient meat mixed with fruit slices, chosen carefully to match what the scans said the species could eat. The smell filled the room, sharp but pleasant. The cub's nose twitched, its eyes flicking from her hand to the food and back. When she slid the bowl closer, the cub hissed suddenly, a quick, defensive sound. It snapped its jaws once, a warning. The movement was so fast that the assistant standing by the wall gasped audibly, ready to call for help. But Alina didn't move away. Her eyes stayed calm, her hand steady. She didn't see a monster in front of her. She saw fear wrapped in instinct. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "You're safe." The cub's fur bristled, and for a second it looked like it might leap. But it didn't. It hesitated, its muscles tense, waiting to see what she would do next. Alina slowly raised her gloved hand, not toward its neck or head, but toward its nose, the place animals used most to sense the world. The cub's pupils narrowed into thin lines, its body rigid. Everyone watching held their breath. Then, in one small, bold motion, Alina leaned in slightly and tapped her finger against its nose. It was light, quick, and precise, just a simple touch. The cub froze. The growl in its chest stopped mid-sound. Its glowing eyes blinked once in confusion, the way a child blinks when they don't understand what just happened. For a long, silent moment, neither moved. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the creature let out a short, soft huff, lowering its head slightly as if startled by its own reaction. Its claws relaxed against the table and the tension in its body melted just enough for everyone watching to feel it. From behind Alina, one of the scientists whispered, "Did it just stop?" Alina didn't turn around. She kept her focus on the cub, her hand still resting lightly near the bowl. "See?" she murmured, smiling faintly. "Not so bad." The cub tilted its head, blinking slowly, its breathing calmer now. It didn't reach for the food yet, but it didn't hiss again either. Something small had shifted in the air between them, a quiet, invisible thread of trust forming out of nothing. When Alina stood, she moved carefully, giving the cub space. It followed her with its eyes but didn't growl. That alone was progress. She gestured for her assistant to record the moment, but her voice stayed low. "No sudden movements. We don't want to scare it again." The assistant nodded, still wide-eyed. "I've never seen one react like that before," he said quietly. "They're supposed to be impossible to tame." Alina smiled faintly but didn't answer. She knew it wasn't about taming. It was about understanding. As the day went on, she stayed nearby, sitting cross-legged on the floor and reading reports aloud, not because the cub could understand, but because the sound of her voice seemed to calm it. Every few minutes, its ears would twitch toward her, curious despite itself. She never tried to touch it again that day, but every time she moved the food bowl closer, it didn't resist. That was enough. Later that evening, when the lights dimmed and the storm began again outside, Alina looked back one last time before leaving. The cub was lying quietly, one paw resting near the bowl she'd left. It wasn't eating yet, but it wasn't hiding either. Its eyes glowed softly in the dark, no longer sharp with fear, but curious and uncertain. She smiled and whispered, "We'll get there." As the door closed behind her, the cub sniffed the air where she had stood. It made a low, puzzled sound, half a growl, half a sigh, and then rested its head on the blanket. Somewhere deep inside its small heart, a part of its instinct began to shift, not yet understanding what it felt, only knowing that for the first time, a human's touch hadn't meant pain. It meant something new, something safe. The days that followed were quiet, but full of small changes that only Alina seemed to notice. Every morning, she arrived at the medical unit before anyone else. The first thing she did was sit near the cub's enclosure, not too close, just within its line of sight. She brought a small tablet with her and read reports aloud in a soft, even tone. It wasn't for the cub's understanding, it was for its comfort. Her voice filled the silence of the room, steady and calm, a sound the creature had begun to recognize. At first, it would growl low whenever she approached, the same deep, warning sound that had echoed through the lab on the first day. But the growls grew shorter with each visit, less like anger and more like uncertainty. She never forced interaction. Instead, she simply stayed nearby, sitting cross-legged on the floor while doing her work, humming softly under her breath. Sometimes she spoke to it about the weather outside or how the storm had finally cleared. The cub didn't respond, but its ears would twitch in her direction when she spoke, and that was enough for her to keep going. One afternoon, when she placed a small bowl of food at the edge of its enclosure, the cub didn't retreat to the back as usual. Instead, it stood still, its amber eyes fixed on her hand. It hesitated, every muscle in its body tense. Alina held her breath and stayed perfectly still. For several long seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air filters. Then, with slow, uncertain movements, the cub stepped forward and sniffed the air. Its nose brushed against her glove, and for the first time, it took a piece of food from her hand. Her chest tightened, a quiet smile spreading across her face. She didn't celebrate or speak. She just watched it chew carefully, as if the slightest noise might undo the fragile trust forming between them. From that day on, feeding became a quiet ritual. Each morning, the cub came closer, its movements more confident. It still snapped occasionally, not out of anger but habit, and each time she simply waited until it relaxed again. One afternoon, while the other researchers watched from behind the glass, the cub ate directly from her palm without hesitation. Someone whispered, "She's a miracle worker." Another laughed softly, calling her the Beast Whisperer. Alina just smiled and shook her head. "It's not magic," she said quietly. "It's patience." The bond between them deepened in small, unseen ways. When she entered the room now, the cub no longer growled. It lifted its head, its ears perking up. When she spoke, it blinked slowly, a subtle sign of comfort. She could feel that it had begun to accept her as part of its world. One evening, as she finished her notes and stood to leave, she heard a sound behind her. It wasn't a growl or a hiss. It was something softer, uncertain, like a low hum mixed with a call. She turned, her heart melting as she realized what it meant. It was waiting for her to stay. She walked back, crouched near the enclosure, and whispered, "I'll be back tomorrow." When she finally turned off the lights, the cub watched her until the door closed. It rested its head on its paws and gave one last quiet sound, almost like a sigh. Alina smiled to herself as she walked down the hallway, the nickname echoing faintly in her mind. She wasn't a beast whisperer. She was just someone who believed that trust could grow anywhere, even between a human and something born to fear them. A full week passed, and the bond between Alina and the cub had grown stronger than anyone in the research outpost could have imagined. Every morning she was there at the same time, sitting by its enclosure, feeding it carefully, talking to it in that soft voice that seemed to calm everything around her. The cub now responded to her presence with quiet curiosity rather than fear. Its eyes no longer glowed with hostility, but with something gentler, recognition. The other researchers had begun to relax too, though they still kept their distance. They admired her courage, but couldn't quite understand how she had managed to tame what they still saw as a wild, unpredictable creature. But Alina didn't think of it as taming. It wasn't obedience she was looking for. It was understanding. That morning started peacefully. The air outside was heavy and still, the calm before a storm. Inside, the soft hum of machines filled the room while Alina knelt beside the enclosure, cleaning out the bedding and replacing the old blankets with fresh ones. The cub followed her every movement, its glowing eyes tracking her hands with quiet interest. Occasionally, it leaned close enough to sniff at her sleeve or brush against her arm, an act that once would have terrified the entire team, but now felt almost normal. The others watched from the observation window, their faces tense but fascinated. "You'd think it was a house pet," one of them whispered, but even he couldn't hide his amazement. Alina smiled faintly as she worked. "You're doing great," she said quietly, glancing at the cub. It blinked slowly, that small sign of comfort she'd come to recognize. Then, without warning, the peace shattered. A sudden crash of thunder split the air outside, loud and violent, shaking the windows in their frames. The cub jerked upright, its ears flattening. The sound triggered something deep within it, pure instinct, the memory of danger, of storms and fear. Before Alina could react, the cub let out a sharp growl, its body tensing. Then it leapt forward. Everything happened at once. Papers flew from the nearby desk as the creature's claws scraped against the floor. Someone screamed from behind the glass wall. Another person shouted, "Get the tranquilizer!" But Alina didn't move. She didn't scream or run. Her body froze only for a second, then relaxed as her mind took over. She could see it in the cub's eyes. It wasn't trying to hurt her. It was terrified. Its instincts had taken over. It needed reassurance, not restraint. The cub landed a foot away from her, claws extended, eyes glowing bright gold with panic. Alina stood her ground, her breathing steady even though her heart raced. The room behind her was chaos, voices shouting, alarms beeping, the click of a safety switch on the tranquilizer gun, but she tuned it all out. All that mattered was the small creature in front of her, trembling, lost in fear. Slowly, she raised her hand, the same gesture she'd used the very first time. Her movements were calm, deliberate. The cub's growl deepened, but she didn't stop. "Hey," she said softly, her voice calm despite the storm outside. "It's okay." You're safe. Her hand moved closer until her fingertips brushed its nose. Tap! The effect was instant. The cub froze mid-growl, its breath catching in its throat. Its eyes widened in confusion, the sound dying before it could finish. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The thunder outside rolled again, but this time it didn't move. Its ears twitched. Its body trembled once, then went still. Alina kept her hand near its nose, not pushing, not pulling away, just waiting. Then slowly, the cub's posture changed. Its claws retracted. The tension drained from its body like air leaving a balloon. It lowered itself to the floor, its sides rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. The growl that had filled the room turned into something softer, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't anger anymore. It was peace. Everyone watching went silent. The shouting stopped. Even the alarms seemed to fade into the background. The cub stepped closer to Alina and, to everyone's astonishment, collapsed gently beside her legs. It rolled onto its back, paws curled toward its chest, eyes half closed. The rumble in its chest continued. A steady, rhythmic purring, soft and content like a machine settling after a long run. Alina exhaled slowly, the tension in her own body finally easing. She crouched beside it and gently brushed her hand along its side. "There you go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're okay." The cub responded with a faint huff of breath, its tail twitching once before going still again. Behind the glass, no one spoke for several seconds. Then someone whispered, almost in disbelief, "Did that thing just purr?" Another voice followed, awed and quiet. "That's impossible!" But the proof was right there in front of them. The creature everyone had feared was lying peacefully beside the human who refused to see it as a monster. Alina smiled faintly, her hand still resting on its fur. She didn't look up at the others. She didn't need their approval. What had just happened wasn't luck or coincidence. It was trust, pure hard-earned trust. As thunder rumbled once more outside, softer now and distant, the cub stayed where it was, eyes closed, its breathing even. The impossible had happened, and it had happened through something simple yet powerful. Kindness. ChatGPT said. By the next morning, the entire base was buzzing with stories about what had happened in the lab. News traveled fast in small, isolated places like this one, and by sunrise, nearly everyone on the research station had heard the same unbelievable tale, the human who had calmed a predator with a single touch. People whispered about it in the mess hall, at the observation posts, even in the hangar bay where the supply ships docked. The footage, captured accidentally by the lab's security cameras, had already been shared among the crew. It showed everything, the sudden leap, the panic, and then the impossible calm. The tiny creature, once wild and feared, rolled over in surrender as Alina sat beside it, hand resting gently on its head, her face calm and steady. The video lasted less than a minute, but it spread like wildfire through the communication network. Reactions were mixed. Some people watched in stunned silence, replaying the scene over and over, trying to understand how something like that could happen. Others laughed and shook their heads. "She's crazy," someone said. "One mistake, and that thing would have torn her apart." But there were others who watched with quiet admiration, their voices softer when they spoke about it. "She didn't fight it," a technician whispered. "She understood it." In a place where rules and logic controlled every decision, what Alina had done didn't fit the manual. It was instinctive, emotional, human. When she arrived at the lab that morning, conversations hushed wherever she walked. Some people looked at her with awe. Others avoided her altogether, as if being near her might attract trouble. Alina didn't let it bother her. She wasn't looking for attention. To her, the only thing that mattered was that the cub was no longer afraid. She entered the lab quietly, her boots soft against the floor. The cub was awake, sitting near the transparent wall of its enclosure. When it saw her, it made that same soft sound she had heard before. Not a growl, but a low, throaty hum. She smiled and crouched beside the glass. "Good morning," she said softly. The creature blinked slowly, its glowing eyes warm and curious instead of sharp and defensive. Her moment of calm didn't last long. Not an hour later, she was summoned to the commander's office. The message came through the intercom, formal and clipped. "Report to Central immediately." She knew what it was about. The commander was not the kind of man who approved of bending rules, especially not ones involving dangerous species. She straightened her uniform and made her way down the hall. The office was dimly lit, lined with reports and holoscreens displaying scientific data. Behind the desk, her commander sat with a stern expression. The footage of the previous day paused on the screen behind him. He didn't waste time. "You know why you're here," he said flatly. Alina nodded. "Yes, sir." He gestured toward the screen. "This." He tapped the display where the cub lay purring beside her. "This has caused quite a stir. Do you have any idea what kind of message this sends? You ignored containment protocol. You took unnecessary risks. You could have been killed." His tone was sharp, but Alina didn't flinch. She stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back. "It wasn't unnecessary, sir," she said quietly. "It was needed." The commander frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Needed?" he repeated, disbelief in his voice. "Your methods are too human, too emotional. You can't treat every threat like a lost child." Alina met his gaze calmly. "Maybe that's what this world needs," she said softly. The commander stared at her for a moment, his jaw tightening, but he didn't respond. Finally, he sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Just be careful," he muttered. "Next time, there may not be a miracle." She nodded and left without another word. Back in the lab, the cub was waiting. It pressed its small body against the glass as she entered, emitting that soft rumble again, a sound that now seemed almost affectionate. When she stepped closer, it followed her along the wall, its eyes glowing warmly in the low light. The other researchers watched in quiet amazement. "It's following her," one whispered. "Like a pet." Alina knelt by the glass, holding out her hand. The cub leaned its head against it, its tail twitching lazily. "Not a pet," she said gently. "A friend." From then on, it refused to let her out of its sight. Wherever she went, its eyes tracked her movements. During feeding times, it waited patiently for her instead of hissing at others. When she spoke, it tilted its head as if trying to understand her words. The once feared predator had become something entirely different, calm, loyal, and oddly gentle. In the quiet hours of the evening, when most of the base was asleep, Alina sometimes stayed behind, sitting near the enclosure as the cub dozed under the soft light. She'd watch its chest rise and fall, its small body finally at peace. Around them, the world outside was still wild and untamed, full of storms and danger. But inside that little lab, there was something rare, a bond built not by power or control, but by trust and kindness. And though some still called her foolish, Alina knew she had witnessed something extraordinary, proof that even the fiercest heart could learn gentleness when met with compassion. Time moved quietly after that day, and the cub grew quickly, its once fragile frame filling with strength and grace. Each week brought new signs of change. The limp in its leg was gone. Its coat gleamed silver under the lights, and the wild sharpness in its eyes softened into something calm and intelligent. It had learned to move through the lab without fear, often pacing beside Alina as she worked, watching her with quiet curiosity. It no longer hissed at loud noises or flinched when someone entered the room. It trusted her completely, and that trust changed the way everyone looked at it. What had once been considered a dangerous creature now walked through the corridors with a gentle alertness, more like a guardian than a threat. But deep down, Alina always knew this peace wouldn't last forever. The cub didn't belong inside a lab surrounded by walls and machines. It belonged out there, in the vast green wilderness of the planet it came from. The realization grew heavier with each passing day. Every time she looked at it, she saw what it had become, a strong, confident creature that no longer needed her protection. Letting it go would be the hardest thing she had ever done, but it was the right thing. One cool morning, she received the official notice from the Habitat Division. The message was short and simple. The subject is ready for release. Her chest tightened as she read it. She had expected this moment, prepared herself for it, but reading the words made it real. When she entered the lab that morning, the cub was waiting near the enclosure's gate, as if it already knew. Its golden eyes followed her, curious but calm. She knelt beside it and smiled faintly. "Today's the day," she whispered. The creature tilted its head, letting out a low, soft hum. She reached out, her fingers brushing along its fur. It leaned into her touch, just like it always did. The release site was located at the edge of the forest beyond the base, a place where the trees stretched tall into a fog-covered sky. The air smelled fresh and damp, full of life. The habitat team worked quietly, setting up the containment transport and checking the scanners. Everyone moved efficiently, but there was a quiet reverence to their actions, as if they understood the importance of what was about to happen. Alina walked beside the transport, her hand resting on the side as the cub looked out through the open slats. It didn't growl or pace. It was calm, though its gaze stayed fixed on her. When they reached the release point, the forest opened before them like a painting come to life. Green mist swirling through silver leaves, shafts of sunlight piercing through the fog. The sound of distant creatures echoed softly in the air. The team opened the gates, stepping back to give the cub space. Alina crouched down one last time, meeting its eyes. "You're free now," she said gently, her hand resting on its snout. "Go on." For a moment it didn't move. Its body tensed slightly, as if unsure of what to do. Its gaze shifted between her and the forest, torn between two worlds it had come to know. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain. Slowly, the cub took a single step forward, then another. The fog swirled around its legs, hiding it partially from view. But just before it disappeared into the mist, it turned back. Alina held her breath. The cub stepped closer again, lowering its head. Then, in a gesture that no one expected, it pressed its forehead lightly against her hand. The warmth of its skin and the faint vibration of its quiet rumble filled her chest with emotion. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes stung, but she smiled, her fingers brushing its fur one last time. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Then, without a sound, it turned and vanished into the green fog. The leaves trembled where it passed, then stilled again. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and for a long moment no one spoke. Even the habitat team, hardened by years of field work, stood in silence, watching the mist close behind the creature. The only sound was the soft hum of the wind through the trees. Alina stayed kneeling for a while, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. She felt both an ache and a quiet peace inside her chest. She had saved it, cared for it, taught it to trust, and now she had let it go. Around her, the world seemed softer, the air lighter. One of the team members placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. She nodded but didn't answer. Her heart was too full for words. As the transport team packed their equipment and the sound of machines faded away, Alina stayed for one last moment, letting the quiet sink in. The fog shifted again, just enough for the sunlight to break through, turning the trees gold for a fleeting second. She smiled faintly, a tear sliding down her cheek. Some bonds didn't need to last forever to matter. Some were meant to teach the heart how to let go. And though the forest swallowed the cub completely, Alina knew she'd never truly lost it. Somewhere out there, beneath the canopy of that wild green world, it would remember her, the human who had seen it not as a threat, but as a life worth saving. And that thought, more than anything, made her heart feel whole. The weeks that followed were quiet. Life at the base returned to its usual rhythm, reports, research, and long, calm days under the green skies of the strange planet. The storms had eased, leaving behind a peace that felt almost unfamiliar. But for Alina, everything had changed. Every time she walked past the empty enclosure, she felt a soft pull in her chest. The kind that comes when something leaves a permanent mark on your heart. The space felt too still now, the hum of the machines too cold. She often caught herself listening for the soft rumble that had once filled the room, the sound that had once meant comfort. One afternoon, she found herself standing at the edge of the forest again, the same place where it had all begun. The ravine stretched below, covered in a blanket of moss and tangled roots. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and wild leaves. She could still remember that night. The rain, the sound of the small, frightened growl, the trembling creature trapped beneath the branches. So much had happened since then. It was hard to believe that the terrified cub she had found was now out there somewhere, strong and free. She stood quietly, the wind brushing against her hair. The forest around her was alive, chirps, rustles, and distant calls blending together into a soft, natural song. For a long while, she said nothing. She just watched the trees sway, her eyes scanning the distance as if part of her still hoped to see it again. She knew the chances were small. Wild creatures didn't usually return once released, but something inside her told her this story wasn't finished yet. The light shifted as the sun dipped lower, painting the forest in gold and green. Shadows stretched across the ravine, deepening as the mist began to roll in again. Alina took a step closer to the edge, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. That's when she saw them, two faint glowing orbs in the shadows between the trees. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But then the shape moved, slow, deliberate, confident. From the fog, a familiar figure emerged. The cub, no, not a cub anymore, stepped into the light. Its silver fur shimmered faintly in the mist, its amber eyes calm and knowing. It was larger now, powerful and graceful, but there was no trace of aggression in its movements. It stopped a few meters away from her, watching with quiet intensity. Neither of them moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every sound fading into stillness. The air between them felt alive, filled with something unspoken, something that didn't need words. Alina's eyes softened, and a faint smile touched her lips. "You remember?" she whispered, barely loud enough for the wind to carry. For a long moment, the creature just stood there, its gaze steady and unreadable. Then slowly it lowered its head. A deep, soft rumble echoed through the air. Not a growl, not a warning, but a sound full of recognition. The same sound it used to make when she sat by its side during the long, quiet nights in the lab. The sound of peace, the sound of trust. Alina felt her throat tighten. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the creature's glow. She didn't move closer. She didn't need to. The distance between them was no longer separation. It was understanding. "I'm proud of you," she whispered softly. "You made it." The creature blinked slowly, its tail flicking once, then twice. The same gesture it used to make when she entered the room. It stood for another moment, as if memorizing her face one last time. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared back into the forest. The mist swallowed its form, leaving behind only the faint echo of that low, gentle rumble that lingered like a heartbeat. Alina stood there long after it vanished, her hands folded in front of her, her chest rising and falling in a deep breath. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scents and sounds of the alien world, life continuing wild and free. She closed her eyes and smiled through the tears that had begun to slip down her cheeks. In that quiet moment, she finally understood what she had been part of. It wasn't about science or success. It wasn't about control or discovery. It was about connection, the simple, powerful link between two beings who had no reason to trust each other but chose to anyway. Humanity's greatest gift, she realized, wasn't strength or intelligence. It was compassion, the ability to reach out with kindness even when faced with fear. She turned to leave, the fading sunlight wrapping the forest in a soft glow. As she walked away, she looked back one last time, her heart full. Somewhere out there, in the green shadows, a once-feared predator carried the memory of a human's gentle touch, proof that kindness could change even the wildest heart. And though no one else would ever see that moment, Alina knew the truth. Some bonds are invisible, but they last forever.